Hey guys, Troll9002 here, back with the second installment of the Valentine's Day story. I've heard a lot today. I heard a lot of rain. Y'all be praying for all of us Southerners, not Florida, thank you. Yet, anyway, we're gonna get ours later, but y'all be praying for the Southerners getting snow right now. We ain't used to snow. We don't do that here. But especially if you're channel friends with Nikki Hudat and Karen Story and the Techno Hillbillies. Just if you know people on, I guess, this side of the states, please be praying for us with all the weather coming our way. But not Florida. We're gonna be Florida. At least until Friday. We're expecting a low of 32 on Friday. Let me get right back into it. So we left off where Justin was told the reason why Sophia was in the hospital. And Adeline was taking Justin to the room to meet Sophia. So let's see where it goes from here. Finally, they reached the room. Adeline went in first to make sure Sophia was decent. And she opened the door for Justin to come in, and he looked at Sophia and smiled big, but had no idea what to say. And he kept his mouth shut so he didn't drool or say the wrong thing. He had to calm himself, and just as he started to talk to Sophia, Sophia mumbled something at him. And as to not be rude, he said, thank you? Then, just as he went to open his mouth and calmly talk to Sophia, Justin's mom texted him, and it was time to go. So, feeling slightly relieved that he hadn't messed up by blurting something really stupid out, he thanked the ladies for letting him visit, and he wished them a blessed day and left. Adeline told him to stop by any time he wanted to, that it was okay to hang out with her daughter Sophia. Well, one day Justin decided to go visit Sophia on a day his mom didn't have a treatment, and that day happened to be on Valentine's Day. Not knowing if she might be allergic to candy or flowers, Justin didn't want to bring any of that, so he put together some paper flowers, and the hospital staff helped him pick the right kind of brooch that Sophia had her eye on for a while in the gift shop. As he made his way to room 11A, his nerves started building up. He knocked on the door and heard Sophia say, "Who is it?" He said, "It's me, Justin." "Oh, 1 minute, please," he said. "Yes, ma'am." A few minutes later, Sophia opened the door and welcomed Justin in, and they sat and talked for a while. The conversation was just as easy like he was talking to Adeline. Speaking of Adeline, where was she? Sophia said that she had to go to work, and if they got the call that Adeline worked less than 3 minutes away, but she had to work to keep supporting the effort and pay the bills. Anyway, that is when Justin gave Sophia the gifts that he made for her, and tears started to flow from her eyes, as she had never had a boy give her a gift before. It felt weird at first, then she felt bad that she hadn't gotten anything for him. He told her not to worry about it because he liked to give gifts just to do it. Sophia asked what the occasion was for her to receive the gifts. Well, Justin stammered, "It is Valentine's Day. Here, let me help you pin that brooch on your gown." And just as he did is when Adeline walked in and watched for a minute, just to make sure nothing was going on. Justin was a perfect gentleman, but even still, Adeline walked in on them and thought she was, even though she was joking, when she said, "What are you doing?" Justin snapped around, felt embarrassed, and ran out of the room. He was embarrassed and thought that Adeline was thinking the worst of him, because he was alone in the room with her daughter. But he was not that kind of man. As he floored the car home, tears streaming down his face, embarrassed as all get out, he vowed then and there that he'd die of embarrassment, and he'd never go back to room 11A. And so, for the rest of Janet's therapy session, Justin would drop her off and go somewhere else until his mom texted. She was ready to go. Every now and then he'd look up at the window to see if he could catch a glimpse of his favorite Sophia, but he never saw her in the window again. It was years later. Justin finally got up the nerve and asked the receptionist about the woman in 11A. That's when the receptionist told him that 11A was gone. Again, Justin ran away sobbing to no end. The woman he loved was gone. She passed away, and her last memory of him was being scolded by her mother and running away instead of staying and fighting for her. He still was not aware that Adeline was just messing around when she said, "What are you doing?" Then he started feeling horrible for Adeline and what she must be going through to not have her daughter anymore. And just as he started to walk out of the hospital with his mom, he heard a bell ring. It was his mom, Janet, ringing her last treatment bell. She was cured of her disease. His mother lived and the love of his life had died. He went and gave his mom a big hug and congratulated her, but he knew, unless it was an emergency or imaging, he'd never go back to that hospital. It was later that year that Justin finished school and moved on to a place outside the small town he grew up in. He decided to look for a job in a totally random town. He found a wonderful job in a little town called Darien, Georgia. It was a small town in Georgia known for shrimp boats, canning factories, and so much more. He applied for a job as a manager in a processing plant, and he got it. This is the job he was going to keep for the rest of his life. One day, while on the job, Justin lost his balance and fell on the floor face first, and he was rushed to the hospital in Georgia. His parents were called because he needed surgery, and they needed people to sign forms. Even though Justin was well known in the community, it was still procedure for the forms to be signed. You know how it is. It all happened so quick. Justin got to meet his anesthesiologist, and he got to meet the surgeon real quick. But there was something that he recognized about the surgeon, that he just couldn't place it. That was the last thought he remembered having as his eyes closed. It felt like an eternity later, like a week, but Justin opened his eyes to see his mama sitting by his bed, and his dad was on the other side of the bed. Justin was in a private room, and his mama got up to let the nurses know he was awake. And they came in and poked and prodded him with temps and readings and this, that, and the other thing. You know, the things, right? And when they were finished, that is when the nurse told him that the doctor would be making her rounds soon and he should be out in a few days. If not the next day, like clockwork, Justin heard the doc's voice knock and enter the room. Just as she walked in, she stopped dead in her tracks. In a moment, she realized who he was and how she knew Justin. But, due to the type of surgery Justin had, he was unable to recall memory of her at the time, so the doctor pretended not to know him and treated him like any other patient. Next day, an unexpected visitor arrived and knocked on the door. Justin said. Soon as the woman walked in, he knew her face, her voice, and her appearance. It was Adeline, tears streaming down her face, and he invited her in to have a seat. And they talked a long, long time, and she apologized for trying to be funny, and he apologized for the misunderstanding. And he asked her what happened to Sophia, and told Adeline what the receptionist had told him about her being gone. Needless to say, it all got cleared up with one conversation, but the one thing that he still had not realized was who the doctor was. Speaking of doctors, it was time for the rounds. The doctor knocked and walked into the room and stood next to Adeline and said, "Hey, Mom, how's our patient doing today?" And that's when Justin just began to cry. He realized his doctor was Sophia, and they had brought her up from Florida because of her specialty in medicine. Instantly, love set in, and he vowed never to lose her again. It was the following year on Valentine's Day they got married, with the whole hospital staff and both families were there, and it is said that from that day on, the hospital in Darien was known as the Hospital of Love. Justin went back to work, and Sophia kept saving lives. And Justin was always at the hospital when he could be, just to see his woman. They never had kids, but they sure didn't mind babysitting every now and then, and needless to say, they lived happily ever after, until they took a kayaking trip on the Swanee River and ran into the Loch Ness monster that was freed by a kid who had no idea of her power. After that, they were changed for life. Life changes. People are ready for it. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow. Just remain faithful to the plan and go with the flow. Remember, it's not our time, but God's time. This is Troll 9002 with the ending of the Valentine's Day story just for you, my loyal listeners. I appreciate you guys. Every comment, every thumbs up and down. Comment if you like, subscribe if you dare. And I'll catch you on the next page turn. And again, I hope you had a great Valentine's Day or Singles Awareness Day. Here's looking to the next one. Have a great week. Bye, y'all.